So we have just about everybody here. I'm going to give it just another second to try and get the last couple of people in. But if they don't show up here soon, we'll go ahead and start. Sorry, folks, I've been swallowing a lot of dust today. It's kind of hurting my lungs. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about solid stock and how we need to prepare solid stock for use in your nightstand. Solid stock is different from sheet goods that we've been using so far, the particle board, in that, sheet goods come already thicknessed. In other words, we can buy sheet goods in any thickness we want. The faces are already parallel. In other words, they're a consistent thickness no matter where you measure them. The edges, the ends are flat, straight, square to the faces. It's already prepped basically for you. All you really have to do is cut it to final sizes, do the joinery, and assemble it, kind of like a piece of IKEA furniture. Now, solid stock, on the other hand, requires a little bit of work, okay? And the work that it requires starts with the thicknessing process, okay? Now, depending on your work, on whether you're working with surface two sides or rough sawn lumber, will determine how much work you have to put into it. But what lumber we have in here is either just surface two sides or rough. So we have bad edges, we have bad ends. None of the edges or ends are square to the faces. They're not a consistent thickness. So there's things we have to do to them. Okay. So when we start to prepare a piece of solid stock, pine, poplar, oak, alder, maple, cherry, whatever it might be, one of the things we need to do now is thickness it. Now, in beginning woods, the material you're handed in regards to solid stock has already been thicknessed. You guys do not have to deal with the thicknessing process at all. All you have to deal with is width and then length. So basically, the first thing you're going to do when you're handed a piece of solid stock, okay, is you're going to draw your parts on that piece of material. In other words, whatever parts you intend to get out of that piece of material you're handed, you have to draw them on it. Now, the first piece of solid stock you would be handed for the nightstand would be the material that's necessary to make the face frame, okay? And the face frame consists of the two side rails, the vertical side rails. Let me see if I can, let me grab a nightstand here. I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay. You need the two vertical side rails, the two horizontal mid rails. And I'm guessing you can't hear me out too far away.
It's definitely a little hard to hear you.
Yeah, this mic doesn't work very well when you get kind of a distance away. So, all right. So last night, I think it was last night, I don't know. I painted your nightstand, the one you guys are doing. I'll show it to you here. Okay, I think I need to go this way. Nope, wrong way. And it's just got a coat of paint on it. Oh, that's a weird color. Okay, so basically what we're looking at is the parts. Come on. There we go. Are the parts that go and cover up the front edges. Okay, so basically there are two pieces of vertical side trim. One goes there, one goes there. Okay, hey, it didn't fall. You know, there's a horizontal bottom rim that goes here. And then there's a horizontal mid-rail that goes right here. Okay? And there's another horizontal mid-rail that goes up here at the top. See that? Cat-like reflexes. It goes up at the top. Okay? So that's what we need to get out of this piece of material right here. Right? So let's talk about this. Let's have a little chit chat. So I have in front of me a piece of material that is exactly like I would hand you guys were you here. Okay? There's enough material here to get all those parts out of it. Okay? So basically what we're trying to do is get these pieces out of this big old chunk of pine here. Okay? And we have a couple of things we want to try and do. Okay? Number one, we want to make the fewest number of cuts necessary to get these parts out. I'd rather make 1, 2, 3 cuts to get these ripped out, 4, 5, 6 cuts, 7 cuts to cut in the length, than make 15, 20 cuts. The more cuts you have to make, the bigger the chance you're going to make a mistake. All right. Another thing about solid stock, the edges are rough. Okay. They're not straight, they're not flat, they're not square. Another thing about solid stock is I can pretty much guarantee the ends are not square. They're not going to be 90 degrees. Okay. But when you're handed this material, it will be thickness. In other words, it's going to be a consistent thickness no matter where you measure it. Oh, that's way too high. Okay, no matter where you measure it, and you're gonna have 2 parallel faces. So we need to draw our parts on this material. Okay. Now, once we draw our parts on there, okay, we're gonna have to joint one of these edges. All right, we're gonna pick the best edge and joint it. Now, we don't know when we start how many passes it's going to take on the joiner to get this edge flat, straight, and square. No idea, not a clue. Could take a single pass, could take 4, 5, or 6. In other words, we don't know how much material we're going to have to remove off this edge to get it flat, straight, and square. Okay. Also, once we get done at the table saw ripping to final width, and we go over to the miter saw to cross cut to final length, we have to make 2 cuts. Okay. Every single cut to length is going to take 2 cuts. Here's why. The very first cut is going to trim and square one end. Once that end is trimmed and squared, we can measure from that end, mark our final length, and cut it to length. But at the end of this thing is all wacky, like this, right? And we try to measure from here, okay, and make a mark and cut it to length. It's not going to work. We're going to have longer at this end than we are at this end. So it takes 2 cuts to cut a board of length. The first cut is a trimming and squaring cut. The second cut cuts it to final length. We don't know how much material we're going to have to take off this end to get it square. We may only have to take a 1/16 of an inch off. We may have to take a 1/4 of an inch off. Okay, so we just don't know until we get up there. What that means, what all of this stuff means, is that when you draw your parts on solid stock, you have to draw your parts to what we call rough dimensions. Okay? Now, what I mean by rough dimensions is this. In the plans, okay, I'm going to change what we're sharing here. If I can find it. Okay, if that thing would go away, it would be really nice. So what we're looking at are these parts right here. Okay, we're looking at the face frame side rail. Excuse me, everything is already 3/4 of an inch thick. That's how I'm going to hand it to you. Okay, the face frame side rail is 1 3/4 wide when it's done, 27 inches long when it's done. The 2 face frame mid rails are 2 inches wide when it's done, 13 inches long. The face frame bottom rail is 3 inches wide and 13 inches long. Okay, so those are the final dimensions right there that we're trying to get these boards to. So what does that mean? When we draw our solid stock parts to rough dimensions, when we draw our parts to rough dimensions, all that means is we're going to add 1/4 of an inch to the width and 1/4 of an inch to the length when we draw them. In other words, we're going to draw our face frame side rails 2 inches wide, 27 1/4 inches long. We're going to draw our mid rails 2 1/4 inches wide, 13 1/4 inches long, and we're going to draw our bottom rail 3 1/4 inches wide and 13 1/4 inches long. We're going to draw everything 1/4 inch longer and 1/4 inch wider so that we know we have enough material in that board so that we can joint an edge before going to the table saw, so that we can make our first trimming and squaring cut before cutting to final length on the miter saw. Okay, we've got to give ourselves basically kind of a buffer, a little bit of padding when we draw them so we know what we're doing. All right, so there's one other thing we need to keep in mind. Okay, and that is we still want to draw the little blade curves in here. Okay, all of our blades in this shop are 1/8 of an inch thick, so we're going to draw 1/8 of an inch curve along the edges and the ends of all our parts. Okay, so if this was our face frame bottom rail that's supposed to be 3 inches wide when it's done, we would draw this 3 1/4 inches line to here, 3 1/4 inches wide to here. Our next line will be 1/8 of an inch past that. Okay, it's 13 inches long when it's done, so we're going to draw it 13 1/4 inches to here, add 1/8 of an inch for the second line. That's our blade curve. That's just the only thing that we know for a fact we're going to eat up when we process these boards. When we make a cut on the table saw or the miter saw, we're going to lose 1/8 of an inch. So we're compensating for that. We're building it into the project. We know we're going to lose it, so we're going to draw it right in there. Okay, so let's go ahead and start drawing some parts. Okay, so you should see the board right here. We're going to sit down and we're going to see if we can't draw some parts on here. Let's see if I can get it done. All right, so we're going to start. I usually start with the largest parts. And in this situation, that would be the face frame side rail. So I've got my plans sitting here. Excuse me, I've got it open to the cut list. All right, I'm going to start with my face frame side rails. Okay, that's these two guys right here. Ones that are going to go like that. All right, so they are 27 inches long when they're done. I can prove that because these have been cut to length already, and they are 27 inches long. Right? So we are going to draw them 27 1/4 inches long. All right, so we're going to make a mark at 27 1/4, and we're going to make another mark, a second mark, 1/8 of an inch past that represents our blade curve. So this is the rough length, in other words, the length that's drawn 1/4 inch longer than it says in the cut list. Right there, that's our blade curve, okay? Hopefully you guys can kind of see that. There's our blade curve drawn in. That first line is our rough length, 27 1/4. That second line is our blade curve, okay? Now, width. These guys are supposed to be 1 3/4 inches wide when they're done, okay? We're going to draw them 2 inches wide. Now, the easiest way to do that is with one of these bad boys, okay? This is a sliding square, or combination square, people call it sometimes. So basically, all we're going to do is we're going to take and we're going to slide this over. So the 2 inch mark, right, we're adding 1/4 inch to the width. So the 2 inch mark is right on that flat surface. So that means the end of this rule is 2 inches from this flat surface. So what that means is if I set this flat edge up against the edge of the board and I drag my pencil along it, there's a 2 inch line right there. Okay. I'm actually going to go ahead while I'm here and I'm going to slide this ruler up. So I'm keeping it tight against the edge of the board, and I'm going to slide this ruler up so that my 1/8 inch mark on the rule is sitting on that first line I drew right there. I'm going to go ahead and draw another line. That's our blade curve. Okay, so we're going to label it. This is our face frame side rail number 1, because we need 2 of them. Hopefully you guys can see that. If you can't, imagine it in your little head. Right? We need 2 of these guys, which means we need to make another line 2 inches past the last line we drew. Now, that's fine. I can add 2 inches plus 1/8 of an inch plus 2 inches. That's no problem. 4 1/8 inches. But when you get way out here and you've got 1 1/4 and 3 1/4 and 1 1/8 and blah blah blah, trying to do that math in your head is not going to, well, your day's not going to go very pleasant. But there's an easier way to do it. All right. So if I need to draw a line, it's 2 inches past the last line I drew. Let's see what happens if I zoom in on this thing. So if I need to draw a line, that's 2 inches past this one. All I have to do is put this up against the edge, slide this up, so the 2-inch mark on the rule, so that 2-inch mark right there on the rule is on the last line I drew. Now the end of the rule is 2 inches from that last line. Draw my line, slide it up another 1/8 of an inch, draw my curves. Okay, so that is going to be my face frame side rail number 2. All right, so there's my 2 side rails. Okay, they are 1/4 inch longer and 1/4 inch wider than it calls for in the plans. Okay, so we have room to join an edge. We have room to trim an end square. All right, there's our 2 side rails. Mid rails, they are 2 inches wide when they're done. We're going to draw them 2 1/4 inches wide. They're 13 inches long when we're done, so we're going to draw them 13 1/4 inches long. All right, let's start with length. I'm going to make a mark at 13 1/4. Another mark, 1/8 of an inch past that. Okay, that's going to be our blade curve. Then we're just going to go ahead and drag it over. So our 10-inch mark, which we're now going to call 0, is sitting on the last mark. We'll come out here at 23 1/4, which is 13 1/4 past there. Hopefully that can just completely confuse you. And then we'll draw our blade curve. We take our square, extend it a little bit, and we draw our curve. There's that one. There's this one. All right, so there's our 2 lengths for the mid rails. That's these little guys. 2 of these guys. One's going to go here. One's going to go here. And we've got enough room left over for our bottom rail to go up here. Okay, let's go ahead and do the width. They're 2 inches wide when they're done, which means we're going to draw them 2 1/4 inches. I want to see if you guys can see this. I don't know if you can or not, but we'll try. Zoom in on that back way a little bit. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. Okay, I'm going to do this. I've got it up against the edge of the board. I'm going to slide it up. So my 2 1/4 inch mark is right there. There's my 2 1/4 inch mark. It's on the last line I drew. Okay, tighten it down. Draw my line. There's my face frame mid rail number 1. There's my face frame mid rail number 2. Okay. So basically what I have is this guy's 2 1/4 wide. So you can, I don't know if you can see it or not. Hopefully you can. It'd be kind of cool if you could. Oh, it goes in even more. That's about it. So I'm tied up against the edge. Okay. Here's my 2 1/4 inch mark right here. It's on this last line I drew. Therefore, this line is 2 1/4 past this one. Okay, so it's a 1/4 inch wider than the plans called for. Last one is our bottom rail. We're just going to go ahead and set this. We'll put a blade curve here. There's our blade curve. We want it to be 3 inches wide when we're done, so we're going to draw it 3 1/4 inches wide. So I slide the ruler up. So the 3 1/4 inch mark is on the last line we drew. Draw it, base, frame, bottom rail, and we only need one. So there is our finished rough dimensions. Okay, so we've got a side rail, a side rail. Let me put these on there so they're right on these marks. Maybe you can kind of get an idea. A mid rail, a mid rail. It's like a pump. The bottom rail. Okay. So there we are. Trying to do this so it doesn't fall. All right. There's our 2 side rails, 2 mid rails, and our bottom rail. So now we're going to cut these out. Okay. If you happen to just feel as though you can answer the question in the chat, I want you to tell me the first machine I'm going to go to with this board, if you can think of it, before I switch it to that machine. Okay. Is it, here, I'll give you a choice. Is it this one? Or is it this one? What do you think? A couple seconds to try. Somebody please get it right. Somebody please at least try. Try to answer it. First one, table saw, table saw, table saw, table saw. So we seem to have a consensus here, the table saw. Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, folks, but no, it's the joiner, okay? In order to be able to safely rip a board and accurately rip a board to width on the table saw, we first have to have a nice, flat, straight, square edge to put against the fence on the table saw. That's basically the definition of a joining operation, is to create a flat, straight, square edge on a board so you can then take it to the table saw. So we're going to joint one edge first, okay? So I don't know if you can see this, but I'll try anyway. So if you look at the edge of this board, it's rough. If I slide my hand, I'm going to get splinters. It's rough, okay? So, and it's not straight either. Okay, you can see it's kind of jacked up. Okay, so we're going to flatten, straighten, and square the edge of that board first. Tighten the fence, tighten the table. That's pretty good. I'm going to make one more pass because it's pretty. So there is our really nice, beautiful, flat, straight, square edge that we can now put against the fence and the table saw. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a nice big arrow or two pointing to that jointed edge. All right, so let's go to the table saw. All right, so we are now, well, almost now. I got to turn this around so I can see what you guys are looking at. This is more difficult than having you guys follow me around the shop, I'll tell you that right now. Not nearly as fun. All right. So we're at the table saw, right? Our home for ripping to final accurate width. When I come to the table saw, I'm going to have 2 things ready to go. first thing I'm gonna do is when I leave the joiner, I'm gonna place my boards on the right side of the fence with the jointed edges to the right, okay? So that all I have to do when I get ready to rip is pick it up, place that jointed edge against the fence. I don't have to flip it, I don't have to rotate it, turn it, anything like that. I'm comfortable and I'm confident that all I gotta do is pick it up, boom, there's my good edge against the fence. That's what I want, okay? I do not want that crummy edge against the fence. Really bad idea. The second thing I want is I want my plans sitting right here, open to the cut list, because this is what I'm cutting to. In the width column here, this is where we rip the width. This is exactly what I'm gonna set the fence to, okay? This has nothing to do with rough dimensions, okay? What it says here is what we're gonna cut it to, okay? If it had taken us 10 passes on the joiner, we'd be way out here somewhere already, okay? We'd have already eaten up about this much material. This is why we give ourselves an extra 1/4 inch in width when we draw our parts. So we've got them sitting here. Our face frame side rails, according to the plans, are 1 3/4 inches wide. That's what it says in the cut list. So we're going to set the fence to 1 3/4. And I'm going to check it real quick because our tape is a little worn out there at the bottom of it. It's at 1 3/4. Okay, so ready to go. All right, our blade height is set to about 1/4 inch above the material. Okay, the blade is 90 degrees to the table. Nobody behind me. I'm doing good. Everything's ready to go. We start it up. I also have a push stick here because my pitch is set to within 4 inches of the blade. In other words, if the pitch is set at 4 inches or closer to the blade, you have to use a push stick. So I've got it sitting here, ready to go. My left hand's right here, keeping it tight against the fence, but my left hand is not going to go past the front of the blade. My right hand's just going to help feed it into the blade. Okay, so I'm rocking my left hand back. I get about here. I'm going to grab my push stick all the way through. Okay, so there's one side rail. We need 2 of them. We're going to go ahead and rip a second one out. There's our second one. Okay, there's our 2 side rails. Ta-da! Like a Christmas miracle. Excuse me. All right, so our mid rails, which are these 2 guys, is the next one we're going to cut out. It's going to be a single strip because we're getting both our mid rails out of that one strip. Okay, they are 2 inches wide when they're done. So all we have to do is unlock the fence, slide it over close to 2 inches, tap it right into where we want it. Perfect. 2 inches wide. Ready to go. Got my push stick. Okay, there's our mid rails, or what will be our mid rails. All right, our last one is the bottom rail. It's 3 inches wide according to the plans. So move the fence out to 3 inches. Tap it right where we need to be. Lock it. Ready to go. So one thing I want you guys to notice, if you can see it, is I don't know if you can see the lines or not, but this is where our original mid-rail line was, right? So we didn't cut on our lines, okay? We were gaining a 1/4 inch with every cut because we drew an extra 1/4 inch. We didn't eat near that much up on the joiner. So we're not cutting on our lines here. We're cutting to what it says in the plans, to what it says at the fence. So there's our parts. Okay, we've got our 2 side rails, 1 3/4 wide, 1/4 inch longer than they're supposed to be. Got our 2 mid rails, 2 inches wide. Some of you probably don't believe me. There you go, 2 inches wide, about a 1/4 inch longer than we need. Well, a little more than that for those. And our bottom rail, 3 inches wide, longer than we need. So our next stop, the next place we would go would be the what? Anybody want to hazard a guess? Give it a shot. What machine do you think we go to next? I don't think we've really even talked about it much more than a cursory attempt. So see if you can come up with a guess. Yes, Kevin, you nailed it. Miter saw. Yeah, I'm glad somebody knows that. Jason, you say it bowed a little bit. Did you notice it bowed while it was cutting? Okay. Whenever you cut a board, and pine's really notorious for this, whenever you make a cut on a board, what you're doing, one of the things you're doing, is relieving internal stresses. So it's like if you ever had a pair of tight shoes or shoes on all day long, you've been walking all day long, and you finally get those shoes off at the end of the day, and you just kind of go, oh, it feels so good, right? That's kind of what this board's saying when you're making a cut in it a lot of times. You'll make a cut, and all of a sudden some internal stresses are relieved, and that board just goes, oh boy, and it bends. Okay, now what can happen on the table saw is it will bend towards the blade. In other words, it will close that curve. It will start to pinch the blade at the back of the blade. That can cause problems if you're not in control of the board. With an overhead guard, you don't have to worry about. Without an overhead guard, if it starts to raise up, you have to be aware of what's happening. It can also pinch the blade to the point where you cannot feed it through the blade anymore. It basically just gets stuck. That's why we have that gigantic switch on the front of the table saw that you can turn it off with your knee so that you don't have to take your hands off the board and give up control of the board to shut the machine off. That's one of the reasons I teach you guys to always shut the table saw and the dado saw off with your knee, never your hands. Because in a situation where something starts to go funky on the table saw, the last thing in the world you want to do is give up control of the board by taking your hands off of it. I want you to maintain, because the only thing keeping that board from flying out the back or flying up in your face is the fact that your hands are still on it or the push stick is still on it. Okay, that way, it's a pretty good analogy. It's a knee-jerk reaction to just move your leg, your knee taps the switch, it turns off. So you don't have to give up control of the board. Okay. So we are not going to go to the miter saw today. I did that last period and it was just an absolute epic fail because of having to move the camera all the way over there and lost track of where I was and all that stuff. That's why it's easier to just have you guys follow me over there. We will hit the miter saw probably Monday, okay? Because we'll hit the miter saw. We'll talk about the miter saw is actually a pretty decently involved lecture. There's a lot to the miter saw. So we'll get to the miter saw. We'll cut the pieces of length, and we'll start talking about joinery for the face frame and how to assemble it. Okay. So we now have our carcass or our case done, painted. Our face frame is cut to accurate width and rough length, and we'll cut it to length on Monday. And then we'll start to do the pocket holes to join it, and we'll assemble the face frame. Then we get the face frame mounted. That means later on next week, we'll be talking about laminating the top. So we're moving right along. We're almost there. My fear is we're going to finish it well before the end of the quarter, but I think the quarter ends like November 2nd or something like that. So we're probably moving along pretty good. Okay. So if you guys have questions, please ask questions. Okay. At any point in time, if you're nervous about asking a question that everybody else can see, ask the question privately. You know, you can go down here to this little thing and you can say, and you can click on you can click on my name and you can just, am I on there? Well, my name would be there. And when you type in a question, it will only show up to me and then I can answer it anonymously. I won't bring you up if you want to do that. But please ask questions if you have questions. I know it's difficult doing it remotely, but there's bound to be some questions because it's very, very lonely in here without anybody here. It's way too quiet. It's driving me even more coconuts than I already am. So that's going to be it for today. Please get your name in the chat. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for getting here on time. Take care of yourselves tonight, and I look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow. Okay, it's Friday tomorrow.